Good evening. I'm Richard Waller, Executive Director of the University Museums at the University of Richmond. We are delighted that you have joined us this evening. We're even more delighted since there was a heavy competition with First Friday, other art events this evening. So we think you picked the right one to come to. So, although we opened 3 exhibitions in the Harnett Museum of Art with the start of the academic year 2.5 weeks ago, very hard to believe, this is our first event to celebrate those exhibitions. Tonight, we are pleased to have the artist Jay Bolatin with us in conjunction with his exhibition titled The Jack-Legged Testament Continues. The exhibition was organized by the University Museums, and I had the honor to work closely with the artist in curating the exhibition. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Jay Bolatin. Jay was born in Kentucky near the city of Lexington. Raised on a farm in Kentucky, Jay's childhood was filled with storytelling and music. Both of these creative influences are very evident in the artwork on view in this exhibition. He attended the Rhode Island School of Design for 2 years and then apprenticed with the sculptor Robert Land. Jay currently lives and has his studio in Cincinnati, Ohio. His first one-person exhibition was held at the Carl Solway Gallery in Cincinnati. Since then, he has had many exhibitions, and his work is represented in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, the Seattle Art Museum, the Cincinnati Art Museum, the Georgia Museum of Art, the Australian National Museum, among many, many others, including our own Harnett Print Study Center. In addition to his incredible drawings and woodcuts, Jay is a prolific writer, composer, songwriter, performer, set designer, an acclaimed musician, and an innovative filmmaker. He has composed and performed musical scores for opera, dance productions, films, and television programs. He performed for years as a full-time singer, songwriter, and guitarist, and he continues to present concerts in the United States and Europe. There are 2 films in the exhibition. Jay's woodcut motion picture, titled The Jack-Legged Testament, Part 1, Jack and Eve, has been screened internationally at museums and festivals, and it won an award for Best Animation at the 2007 Santa Fe Film Festival. His animation film, Carmen, is a prologue to a work in progress and was recently screened to great acclaim at Cincinnati's Singing for Myself, Seeing Opera Film Festival. Following the lecture, we will take a few questions, and then please join us for the reception and to see the exhibition. The title of Jay's talk this evening is The Migration of Imagery. Please join me in welcoming Jay Bolatin.
In the mid-70s, for 5 or 6 years, I lived pretty far out in the forest in near, maybe 20 miles from a town called Cynthiana, Kentucky. I lived on the Licking River, and I would go into town maybe twice a week to eat at a place called McKnight's Boarding House Cafeteria, and by the Louisville Courier-Journal, which was a great newspaper at the time. It's still a decent one. And I was having lunch there one day and opened the paper and found this article, which you know how sometimes you just kind of almost intuitively cut or rip an article out of the newspaper and put it in your wallet. And I read this and had some stirring of recognition, I don't know. And it concerned a town called Inez, Kentucky, which was maybe 2 hours east of where I was living, in which a boulder, for apparently no reason that they could discern, came down the mountain and went into the house, a recently built house, and it entered into the bedroom of a little girl. It was a house-sized boulder, but it somehow either had a concave place in it or bounced, and it didn't hurt her at all, but killed everybody else and killed her parents and so forth, and imploded the house. And so I'm going to skip that for the time being. Here is the boulder right here in the foreground, which is where the house used to be. And there was all kinds of information in that article about how they could not retrieve the parents' bodies until they had to go into the basement and cut the floor out from under them and lower them down. So now this is in 1976. It was June, I think, the 12th, or July the 12th, 1976. This is in, I think, March of 2001 at the Pittsburgh, the Opera Theater of Pittsburgh. And that is, in my mind, that boulder. Now, how did I get there? Well, I'm going to talk about that some. This is that production in Pittsburgh. Well, about maybe 15, 16, 17 years after I cut that article out of the newspaper, I found it in my wallet and read it and noticed that just intuitively, much of what that article seemed to concern was what I had concerned myself with my work for many years. Questions of fate, questions of unseen forces in the world, questions of perhaps trying to make meaning where there may not be any, but that I was convinced that it might be our job to try to find meaning. So I started to make, just intuitively, this portfolio of woodcuts. And it had the epigram, "To deny the existence of metaphor," which I can talk about. What I did was, for 2 or 3 or 4 years, I just made intuitive imagery. I probably made 160, 170 prints. In the end, I reduced them to, I think, 60 images and got rid of the rest. But I just started off with what seemed to be the obvious, is the little girl perhaps watching the boulder come down the hill. One would imagine a little girl with a stuffed animal perhaps in her arms. The parents in the other room, the boulder on top of the dead parents. The little girl. And I started to name things. What was the little girl's name? Well, I had a little girl I still have a little girl, but she's not so little anymore. And she loved Alice in Wonderland. She loved to she would make me read that amongst other things every night, and then listen to tapes of it after I was finished reading it. And she had memorized, by the time she was 9, she could recite the whole book of Alice in Wonderland. And in the beginning of Alice in Wonderland, there is a poem in which the Reverend Dodson Lewis Carroll writes that he is rowing this group of girls down the river in a rowboat, and the one named Secunda of the little girls asks him to tell her a tale that has nonsense in it. And I named the girl Secunda, and named her little stuffed animal Lucy. I also had many copies of Alice in Wonderland, and when I decided that this probably had to be also music, or a kind of cycle of songs, or some kind of sustained musical effort, I started to write a text into a kind of an abandoned copy of Alice in Wonderland, and this is a page from that. And it was a great thing where if I couldn't think of a word, not so much looking at the meaning of Lewis Carroll's words, I would just pick a word from him. It was like having a writing buddy there. If I couldn't think of a word, I just, well, that's a good word, I'll use that one. And filled this book up like that, and kept going with imagery. Of course, the mountain with the boulder on top of it that's going to come down. And then I imagined, well, this is some physical kind of thing. This boulder is coming down a mountain. There are forces at work in nature. And what are those forces? And I had lived much of my life much of my 20s in the forest, but much of my childhood in a rural situation, and could readily feel this kind of sense that there is a force out there, sometimes benevolent, sometimes not so benevolent. I delineated that into a kind of drummer, because you hear this rhythmic, even in the forest, can be a noisy place and not that peaceful, believe me. And so I concocted this drummer for that force, and he started to appear in many of the woodcuts. And then I just imagined her kind of yearning at that point in her childhood, where her bed could be a kind of vehicle, and both objectively and figuratively. And now we skip ahead years, to this factory space, and I had decided at that point that this imagery should migrate, if you will, into a theater piece. And I started to build. The woodcuts are like 3 by 5, mostly little, and but I tried to make those big, the imagery big, and tried to figure out ways. Well, could you make a bed that could actually travel? And and continued making the imagery, I seem to have the experience that when I'm working on a piece like this, that almost anything you read or see or do seems to have something to do with it. And I was looking for some force in the world that might be a protagonist, but I had the intuition that it was a kind of innocent protagonist, perhaps not innocent, but I mean not cognizant of action. So, and I had been reading, this is from the preface of Joseph and His Brothers by Thomas Mann. It says, whatever he says, he remains that which he is. the principle of contradiction, umbrage, and dispersal, which stirs up emotions of disquiet and exceptional wretchedness in the breast of one single man among the blithely agreeing and accepting host, drives him out of the gates of the past and the known into the uncertain and adventurous, and makes him like unto the stone which by detaching itself and rolling is destined to set up an ever-increasing rolling and sequence of events of which no man can see the end. And I thought, oh my God, this is the character I'm looking for. So I drew this person who became it came to be called an opera. I did not at first call it an opera, but an opera is a sung story, so okay, it is that. And this man was called Tuxedo, because I imagined that he was just wandering in the forest in a tuxedo for some reason that you didn't really know, and he just leaned up against the boulder to rest, and that's what set it rolling in my version of this event. And now we skip several years later to the stage of the Pittsburgh Opera. That is Monty Jaffe in that role of Tuxedo. Monty is quite a brilliant and well-known bass baritone that has lived in Germany for 40 years, he was kind of famous for doing the character of Wotan in the Wagner cycles. More forces. What happens to Tuxedo? In the end, I imagine that he would turn into a kind of force himself, a mechanical force. And again, just intuitively in the woodcuts, I went through this process of imagining him turning into some mechanical force like this. And I liked that, and that became this force that bisects the kind of force of, to put it in simple terms, the force of good, which was the drummer, and the force of evil, which was the kind of totalitarian figure. And there is the embodiment of the car, as it came to be known, which drove around the stage, and no one could understand how it was moving because it didn't seem to be attached to anything, which it wasn't, but there was a person inside of it, and it worked like a pedal car. I bet some of you all had little pedal cars, and it worked like a huge pedal car. And more imagery. This is myself and some of my friends building the final stages of the set, which was this big mechanical piece with quite visible mechanics, ropes and pulleys and drive chains and so forth. Again, the drummer, the fight between the drummer and the soldier. There's the fight in the studio between the soldier and the drummer. There's a kind of panoramic view of the factory space where we were building this. Now I'm going to play you just a little tiny segment. Unfortunately, it was not recorded professionally, but this is from the production in Pittsburgh. Do I have this up? Yes. Okay, here we go. Cross your fingers. So on stage, this became this rather difficult setup where the little girl was not supposed to see physically this older man, tuxedo, and he was not physically to see the little girl. So, and it became a kind of coming of age story for her and a kind of losing of age story for him. And they became each other's advisors. There was a lot of discord in the beginning, and as the piece progressed, they started to see the same things and to sing much more in harmony. And it was, it was very difficult and highly criticized by the classical opera guy there. And I put that picture in because I just love it. It's a little hard to explain, but there's a tower that builds itself on stage and then raises up and collects the boulder and lowers the boulder back down towards the audience. And then when it gets to be about 45 degrees, this beautiful, that's Amy Warshall is her name. She sings for the Hawaiian opera right now. Rises up out of the boulder. And so the girl, who could have been destroyed by this boulder, is in some way saved by it, in my mind at least. So, that took about 10 years of my life. And between the woodcuts and building the sets and so forth and doing this production and so forth. I might again mention in the very beginning, the epigram to the woodcuts that said, to deny the existence of metaphor. And I remember when we were shipping all this mechanical stuff up to Pittsburgh to the opera stage, and the very British director of the Pittsburgh Opera was watching all this come together, and a brilliant guy and a friend. And I had talked to him about this notion that he said, what are you talking about, to deny the existence of metaphor? That is the end-all and be-all of what poets and artists deal with, is metaphor. And I said, well, no, I want what is happening on stage to be real. It's happening now, this night, what is on stage. It's not a metaphor of anything. And one of my proudest moments there was when the tower gathered together and went up to collect the boulder, and it started to come down towards the audience. Everybody in this whole section got up and moved. And I thought it was just great. And because they were afraid that it was going to kill them. Okay, so during that process, I did start to work on what resulted, again, another 10 years down the line in the woodcut motion picture. But that starts in kind of the mid-90s. And with these pieces are in the show, in the museum. And I had been thinking about mechanical processes. And if you really look at those, it's all interconnected. So that and I was imagining this kind of classic Adam and Eve stance, and here's an angel which exists in the opera and so forth, and I had just been thinking about this story of Adam and Eve and how strange I always found it to be, because I never understood what Eve did wrong. I thought she was wonderful, and curious, and so I just sort of intuitively put this more contemporary figure into the scene, and just to see what would happen. And this turned into a triptych, which you can see, and I often put imagery from former projects into current projects, so that they can kind of come along with it all. But in this, in one of these, in I think the first of this triptych, I just, again, intuitively inserted this jack-in-the-box. And in terms of storytelling, I generally start from making pictures, and I learn from my own pictures. I sit there and look at them and try to figure out what the hell I'm talking about. And so this figure of the jack-in-the-box seemed very important to me, and I concentrated on that. And I made another series of woodcuts, color woodcuts, trying to delineate in my mind some alternative version of the story of Adam and Eve, the Genesis story. So it was called A Prehistory to That Which Is, by mistake, called The Fall of Man, Jack and Eve. And I kind of worked out the scenario. That says the same thing in German and Russian and Hebrew and French. So very quickly, I'll go through this narrative. This figure on the left is based on a hero of mine, is William Blake, the English poet and printmaker. And he called the God of the Hebrew Testament Nobodaddy, and I conceived of that figure as Nobodaddy, or God, who comes along and blows on Jack, and Jack breaks free, and Jack goes to that classic Adam and Eve place with the tree, and kind of stands in my understanding, for the serpent, because you see he still has his billows and he can turn any which way. And he gives the violin that Nobodaddy gave him, he gives the violin to Eve. And Jack and Eve go off together. Adam is in my story, but he's a bit of a dolt in my story. He's busy naming the beasts and the birds, and he's not paying much attention to Eve. And they go to what came in my mind to be known as the Theater of the Western Regions, which is us, basically. And they put on this act, which to them is just full of creation and creativity and vitality. And then they are so sort of excoriated by the audience that the audience throws all kinds of fruits and vegetables at them, among them an apple, which Eve catches. That's how she gets the apple in my version. And she realizes her obligation to Western civilization and has to go back to the garden and start all over again with the story that we've all heard. And there's Jack getting stuffed back into his box in that kind of classic Adam and Eve stance with the fig leaves and so forth that you've seen from Dürer Who are some of the others? That person, yeah. And I did make one more because it made me so sad. I like Jack a lot, and so that's Jack turning his own crank. It's called auto-resurrection. So, now we skip to the current project. There are not many slides left, because you can see the result of my attempt to make a motion picture out of the Jack and Eve scenario in the museum with the motion picture called The Jack-Legged Testament Part 1, Jack and Eve. That, again, that took another 6 or 7 years. And another portfolio had to be made to essentially extract all the imagery from the picture plane and make a book of parts, which became another portfolio of prints, which you can see. And then the movie was made from those parts. A score written, they're singing woodcuts, and some wonderful Nigel Robeson, who is probably the, I think most eminent English lyric tenor, plays the part of Jack. Again, Monty Jaffe plays the part of the serpent. And a friend of mine, a wonderful band called Over the Rhine, their lead singer Karen Bergquist plays Eve, and so that happened, and then I wanted to make that a trilogy of motion pictures made in various ways, and so I tried to conceive, well, what would the Jack-Legged Testament Part 2 be? And that brings us up to now. And I was interested in, this drawing is not in the show. It has to do with a thread of narrative that I don't deal with in this exhibition. But it interested me because, do you remember from Limbus, Secunda? And do you remember Lucy? They're there. This man is kind of a further embodiment of who was called Tuxedo in Limbus, but now he has a sousaphone, so now I call him Mr. Sousaphone Man. And there are various other references here. One is this fellow who is just lingering there at this seaside carnival. And yes, there he is, this man here. And he is standing in for a hero of mine. This man, Bruno Schultz. I don't know if any of you know his short stories or his drawings. Remarkable man. Died in the awfulness of World War II. But it was a Polish, and I wanted to close with a letter that he wrote. Bruno says, I do not know how we in childhood arrive at certain images that are of crucial significance for us. They play the role of those threads in a solution around which the sense of the world crystallizes for us. Such images constitute a program, establish the foundation stock of the spirit, given to us very early in the form of premonitions and half-conscious sensations. It seems to me that the rest of our life is spent in interpreting these insights, breaking them up in what we become, leading them across the whole stretch of the intellect which we can summon up. These early images mark out, for the artist, the limits of his creativity. His art is deducted from ready-made assumptions. Later on, he does not discover anything new. He only learns to understand even better the secret he was entrusted with at the beginning, and his art is continual exegesis, a commentary on this reverie that he was given. The knot into which the soul has been wound is not a false knot that can be untied by pulling at one of the ends. On the contrary, it gets knotted more and more tightly. We can manipulate it, trace the course of the thread, look for the end, and art is born of this manipulation. Thank you. I'm told that I'm required to answer questions if there are any. Yeah. But you don't have to. Yes, sir.
Stylistically, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you hold things to artists, let's say like a Rothko's watch?
You know, I'm sure I do. Not consciously on that case. I do love the, people from the Weimar years in between the wars in Germany, Gross and of course, this is Bruno Schulz, drew his own, illustrated, I guess, his own stories. And William Blake is a hero of mine, and there are many references. Beckmann, I love his work, but Mr. Bosch, I can't think, that at least consciously that's been a big influence. No. Yes.
Have you ever been in contact with a woman who, in that actual story, was a little girl?
No. I did ride my bike up there once, and I got about halfway there and decided that I didn't want to see that place. It's not really about that. It's become about something else.
Is she aware of the whole art project?
I rather doubt it, but I don't know. Well, let's drink. Oh, no. Yeah.
I noticed a lot of really nice typeface all throughout the presentation.
Nice what?
Typeface.
Typeface. Yeah.
The fonts. Just curious if that was ever a side passion of yours.
Well, look, I would assume you're referring to the cut imagery. Yes. Again, book design and so forth during the Weimar years still interests me. I think it's astounding looking, and I have an interest in making physical, or giving language a sense of being physical. You'll see in the exhibition that I've written on the walls some narrative from the current story, which is an attempt on my part to make language physical, literally physical. And so, yes, I do have a great interest in that sort of thing. Yes, ma'am.
As a young child, did you have the feel of storyteller? Because what you mentioned, the influence on children, having grown up in Germany, the grim fairy tale. Stick with me, and they're kind of powerful, like the images you presented.
Yes, I do, of course, know the Grimm tales, and there was, a lot of storytelling going on, not particularly in my house, but I lived on a farm in which there were many families lived there, tenant farmers who were very nice to me, mostly black people and Appalachian people. And then I lived with, and we were pretty much the only Jewish farming family in Kentucky. And then there were people that had come, during the war that were Russians or French or Yiddish-speaking people. So it was quite jolly. There were black people and Appalachian people and people speaking Russian and French and Yiddish and all just trying to yap away at each other. Everybody seemed to get along. I thought that's how the world worked, But I heard a lot of stories, yes. And they were all quite grim. Speaking of the Grimm brothers, and then sort of, yes, the Bible stories, one was read those or told those, but there was this sense, I did not delineate between Bible stories and, for example, I thought that Pinocchio was a book of the Bible. I thought that was in the Bible. And I still think it could be, I don't see, or Kafka. Kafka could have written a book of the Bible. Why not? Or Thomas Mann, this kind of invested language, which I find interesting and physical. Yeah.